I wanted to ask you something about Parliament, because Parliament hasn't been sitting since the end of July. They come back on Monday, next Monday. They're off again on the 22nd, not back until the 17th of October. Isn't it going to feel ridiculous when people are so anxious about their bills that they're both off talking to the party faithful? Tom, I'll start with you.
Well, I think that's part of what's going on, but part of what happens at party conferences is the party leaders, the parties talking about the big issues facing the country and what they do about it. I would hope and expect that Liz Truss, by the time we get to party conference season, will have said a bit more than she has already about what she wants to do about the cost of living crisis. I'm sure that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party will want to use their conference partly as a platform to challenge that. I think what the public probably wouldn't forgive any of the parties at their conferences is if they use that time not to talk about those big issues that people are worried about, but to talk about other minor issues that might concern party members but don't concern the public so much. I think the leaderships will both be quite alive to that worry and that possibility. The members aren't always as alive as the leaderships are to that sort of issue. So there's a danger of distraction. But I don't think that the party conferences in themselves are a problem, because they really are a platform to talk about these issues. So it is politicians doing their job and telling us what they'll do. Whether we agree with the solutions they come up with is a different question.
Well, that's a fair argument. Do you buy that argument, James? Is Parliament, does it sit enough? I mean, he'll be sitting for, a number of weeks out of the last 3, probably, by the time you get back to 17th of October?
Sorry, Gloria. I totally agree with Tom, actually. I think it depends how the time is used and how the events are used themselves. I think it's not feasible for Liz to get to, if Liz does win, to get through the next month into conference without talking about the cost of living crisis. And I do think people don't notice whether Parliament's sitting or not sitting. They notice whether or not politicians are doing something about the things that they care about. And I think that's the big thing that the Conservative Party need to get on with. I do think, to your point about whether or not they've been around, and Tom's point about what they're talking about, we can't spend another month just talking about ourselves, because that is what the Conservative Party have been doing for the last 6 weeks for legitimate reasons to select a leader. But nonetheless, as Tom pointed out, it's got to be about the issues that people care about.
James, I'm going to stick with you. There's a bit of a hoo-ha, perhaps it's a media hoo-ha, about Liz Truss cancelling a set-piece interview with the BBC, which was scheduled to go out this evening. Rishi Sunak says she is avoiding scrutiny. Actually, she's done loads of interviews. They both have. Liz Truss has done one here on GBNews. They've both done many televised hostings. She has every right to turn down an interview, doesn't she?
Yes, I agree. I mean, I personally would never have agreed to it in the first place. I think it's totally pointless. And it's one of these kinds of, frankly, like Twitter arguments about whether or not someone's agreed to an interview. In any campaign, you've got to focus on the people that are selecting you. Some Conservative members will watch these interviews, but that's not the bulk of the audience. I also think, to be brutally honest, if you're the front runner, as she is, then doing interviews that are high risk, personally, I would avoid them.
OK, let's move on, and I'll go to you, Tom. Boris Johnson is on a farewell tour of Britain. It's going to be short because he won't be in post this time next week. And it's a general question. You've worked with, you've seen Labour Prime Ministers go in the olden days when they used to exist, but you've seen Labour leaders go, and you've watched them at close quarters. How do you bow out gracefully from politics?
Well, I think if you really want to bow out gracefully from politics, you go fairly quietly. You say goodbye, you say thank you. You do talk a little bit about what you think you've achieved, but you acknowledge that it's time to move on. Now, clearly, not all politicians leave happily. Some lose elections, some are kicked out by their parties. There are all sorts of Boris Johnson clearly didn't want to go at this point. I'm not convinced that he will bow out gracefully, because I think he resents the way that he was kicked out, and that could well cause problems for the incoming leader. In terms of, I think there are problems facing the Conservative Party now about how far they want to say that Boris Johnson was a great Prime Minister and how far they want to say he was a disaster. If he was a great Prime Minister, why did they get rid of him? if he's a disaster, that's a bit of a problem for what they want to do going forward, particularly because Liz Truss wants to endorse a lot of what he did. So that's a real dilemma for them. So far as he's concerned, though, I think he's going to want to say as positive a set of things as he can about his record. He's going to have plenty of platforms to do it. And if I were Liz Truss, it wouldn't be my biggest worry by a long way, but it would be a small worry.
James, Tom from Labour doesn't think Boris Johnson will bow out gracefully. Do you? And how could he bow out gracefully?
Well, I don't think it's about graceful or not. I think anyone wants to set out their legacy. Any politician wants to do that in some way. I imagine that Boris Johnson will take the kind of Churchill approach and say that, I intend history to be kind to me, I intend to write it. I imagine we'll see, a book and all that kind of stuff from him fairly quickly. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think, whether you're Tony Blair, whether you're Theresa May, whether you're John Major, everybody cares about how they're perceived by the public. These are people that, go and stood in front of the electorate in the first place. So I think, as Tom says, it will be interesting to see how the Conservative Party, I think you've already seen that over the summer. There's certainly kind of buyers, or maybe in this case sellers, remorse, and people kind of pointing out, he got Brexit done. He actually did a pretty decent job during COVID. Obviously had his troubles, but in terms of actually the handling of it, and he'll be looking to set that out as his legacy in the most positive way possible. But it is a problem for who comes next. How do they deal with that? He's a big, big voice, probably the most prominent politician we've had in this country for a decade.
OK, I'm going to go left field for my final question, because you two are used to, or if you're good at your jobs, which and you both were, you had to manage the reputation of the politicians you worked for. Meghan Markle, who I think it's fair to say divides opinion, but has a very largely hostile British media. When it comes to the British media, if they're hostile to somebody, is it possible, if you are brilliant at your job, to change their image and change the perception of the media? Tom?
Well, I think it is possible. Certainly the perception can change, because Meghan Markle hasn't always had negative press from the British media. So clearly that's a change that's happened. It's not impossible that it can go the other way. I think one of the differences between the world in which James and I both worked in terms of politics and the royal family or other areas of public life is that politicians can be very here today, gone tomorrow. They win elections, they lose elections. If they lose elections, they're gone, and it's quite hard to rebuild after that. And also their popularity depends on things that they do that may well affect real people in adverse ways. Royals, pop stars, other celebrities are not, they don't work in the same way. Meghan Markle isn't going to get voted out by anyone. If she's got staying power and she wants to remain as a public figure, she will be a public figure for years and decades to come. And I don't see any reason why, over the course of that time, her reputation might well improve. But some of the things that she says are things that are not designed, frankly, to go down that well in the British media. If she's comfortable with that, then fine. But poor headlines are part of the price that she pays for that. But she can, there's all sorts of ways that she can change over the very long career she's got ahead of her.